Hello and welcome to Renegade Files, your secret meeting covering paranormal adventures, unsolved mysteries, and deep cultural analysis. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, broadcasting from the Jungle Villa Outpost, deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files, episode 128, Edward Snowden, Deep Dive. Amid the rapid and widespread surveillance state expansion of post-9/11 America, one NSA contractor spoke out about illegal spying on American citizens that was being conducted by the intelligence community, and he provided the documents to prove it. In doing so, he proved that the NSA director and Army General Keith Alexander either fully and comprehensively lied to Congress in a 2012 hearing on the subject, or was woefully unaware of an extensive and elaborate operation, arguably the main operation, being actively conducted by the agency he was heading. When the information Snowden revealed became public knowledge, he was instantly cast as both a hero to some and a traitor to others. But the illegal data collection systems and projects he revealed are not, and have never been, in dispute. This episode is a deep dive into who Edward Snowden was, the positions he held, and how his initial whistleblowing unfolded. It will explore and explain the spying and data collection programs that Snowden shed light on, what has happened as a result since, and where we stand today, both in light of and in spite of the revelations Edward Snowden has given us. Regardless of what you think or feel about Edward Snowden, this is a fascinating story. If he is a figure who is on the fringe of your radar, now at the threshold of America's 250-year anniversary, is a great time to learn more about who he is, what he did, and what we know because of his actions. So come with me now as we decode, decipher, and dox the world's most famous whistleblower on Renegade Files, episode 128, Edward Snowden, Deep Dive. Edward Snowden, Deep Dive. Part 1. Background. Edward Snowden was born on June 21st, 1983 in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. He went to a community college and was later accepted into an online master's program with the University of Liverpool, although he never finished. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 2004, became a Special Forces candidate, never completed the training because he severely injured his legs. Actually, he broke both of his legs, and he received an administrative discharge. He was employed in 2005 as a security guard at the University of Maryland's Center for Advanced Study of Language. This was a research center sponsored by the National Security Agency, that's the NSA, and Snowden has said in interviews that that job required him to obtain some level of security clearance. This seems to have been the first contact he had with a security clearance level intelligence operation. Snowden's father was an officer in the Coast Guard, and his mother worked for the U.S. District Court in Maryland. His sister is a D.C. lawyer, and his grandfather was a Coast Guard admiral. Edward Snowden's work history is, in my opinion, scattered, a bit illogical, and a surprising mix of low-level and high-level jobs. He's also a victim of both subtle media spin as well as outright slander. So let me give you an example of the subtle media spin I'm talking about. If we read Wikipedia, we learn that Snowden missed 9 months of high school due to an extended illness. That section goes on to say, quote, "Rather than returning to school, he claims to have passed the GED test." That's the subtle media spin. Saying that he claims to have passed the GED makes him sound like a liar. But the fact is that we know he must have passed the GED because he went on to be accepted into more than one college. In fact, the next sentence in that very same article says that he took classes at Anne Arundel Community College and worked online toward a master's degree in computer security at the University of Liverpool in 2011, both of which would require at least a GED. So the Wikipedia editor knows he had his GED, but frames his acquiring it as a claim. This is classic media spin. It can be true, but also misleading. Snowden can have his GED, and he can also claim to have it. Both of those can be true. But saying he has his GED is reporting the facts. Saying he claims to have his GED is spin. Moving on. So a guy with a GED takes a computer security class, and we know he worked for a university program that was run by the NSA, and that he was in the Army as a Special Forces hopeful, but was injured out of that. He attended a 2006 job fair, which landed him a job with the CIA. That seems easy. I didn't know you could just go to a job fair and get a job at the CIA, I guess so. The CIA assigned him to their Global Communications Division in Langley, Virginia. In March 2007, the CIA stationed Snowden in Geneva, Switzerland, gave him diplomatic protection, and put him to work maintaining their computer network security there. He was assigned to a diplomatic post with the United Nations, where he represented U.S. interests before the UN and other international organizations. As part of his job, he was given a diplomatic passport and a 4-bedroom apartment near Lake Geneva. Snowden was considered by some to be the top technical and cybersecurity expert in Switzerland at the time. And he was handpicked by the CIA to support cybersecurity for President George W. Bush at the 2008 NATO summit in Romania. In 2009, Snowden went to work for Dell, who manages computer systems for many government agencies. One of these was a section of the NSA, and Snowden was assigned to this division through an NSA operation in Japan. So he was off to Japan. While there, he instructed the top officials in defending and hardening their networks against Chinese hackers. He was asked to speak on the subject at a 2009 conference in Tokyo, and in the process of preparing for that presentation, he investigated the system of mass surveillance the Chinese government had in place to basically spy on their citizens. This revealed to Snowden some striking parallels between what China was doing and what he knew about the NSA up to that point. This led him down the path of exploring and eventually exposing the tactics and established programs the NSA was running to basically spy on the American people, and we'll get into exactly what those were and how they worked in part 3 of this episode, so stay tuned. Snowden worked at Dell for 4 years, rose to the rank of cyber counterintelligence expert, and along the way learned core Java programming and studied advanced ethical or white hat hacking in India. In 2011, he came back to Maryland with Dell, where he worked as a system administrator for Dell's CIA account. Snowden was then transferred to a Dell Systems managed NSA office in Hawaii. This was in March of 2012. In that same month, then NSA Director and U.S. Army General Keith Alexander testified by answering questions about allegations of NSA spying on U.S. citizens in response to questions from Representative Hank Johnson during a United States Congress hearing about allegations made by former NSA officials that the NSA was engaging in collection of voice and digital information of U.S. citizens without warrants and without due cause. At that hearing, NSA Director, Army General Keith Alexander, repeatedly denied any such activity, Let's listen to some of that hearing right now.
Does the NSA routinely intercept American citizens' emails?
No.
Does the NSA intercept Americans' cell phone conversations?
No.
Google searches?
No.
Text messages?
No.
Amazon.com orders?
No.
Bank records?
No.
What judicial consent is required for NSA to intercept communications and information involving American citizens?
Within the United States, that would be the FBI lead. If it was a foreign actor in the United States, the FBI would still have to lead and could work that with NSA or other intelligence agencies as authorized. But to conduct that kind of collection in the United States, it would have to go through a court order, and the court would have to authorize it. We are not authorized to do it, nor do we do it.
So when Snowden heard that testimony, he may have fallen out of his chair. He later described that hearing as a turning point for him. He knew that Alexander was being untruthful, either by intent or ignorance, but Snowden believed the former. Snowden has said that this was the moment he decided to come forth with the information to prove the NSA was in fact spying on all of us. And let me put my 2 cents in here on this subject. Regardless of what you believe about Edward Snowden and what he did at the outset of this, whether you think he was a patriot or a traitor, the fact is, he was extremely conscientious and careful about what he did and how he did it. He went to great lengths to make sure he didn't reveal any documents or information that would compromise the security of the United States, military secrets that he may have had his hands on, or any kind of information that would draw into question anyone else that he worked with. He was extremely cautious to make sure he didn't reveal anything that could compromise someone in the military, any military action, anything that we were doing against a foreign nation, any kind of information of state secrets. The only secrets he revealed were the facts that the NSA was spying on American citizens without warrants and without due cause, wholesale, to the tune of millions and millions of transactions, phone calls, emails, on and on. Snowden proved that the director of the NSA categorically either lied to Congress in his testimony or was so woefully ignorant of the goings-on of a vast majority of his department that he was absolutely incompetent. Because they were doing this. One or the other of those things is absolutely and undisputably true, because the documents that Edward Snowden released proved that they were doing all of the things that the NSA director told Congress that they were not doing. Reading our emails, looking through our phone records, reading our text messages, and on and on and on. Spying on us through the cooperation of AT&T, which we know, also Verizon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, more. Edward Snowden took great actions to make sure that he only revealed documents that proved they were doing this, and to not release anything that could be possibly used against the US by a foreign enemy, revealing any kind of military action or anything like that. Absolutely, he did not. Now, in the process of finding the proof, he had to look through a whole bunch of stuff. So he looked at things that if he did put them out in the public, would compromise the military, and could be categorized as unpatriotic reveals of information, spying, whatever the case may be. So he had to go through a lot of things, and in the process of doing so, he came across things that would fall into that category, but he did not make them public. But he did, in the parlance of hacker terms, touch them. They were breaking the law, and they were spying on American citizens without warrants. That's not up for debate. That is just a fact. But Edward Snowden, in the process of proving it, was so conscientious about the way he did it and how, that he tagged all of the documents that he looked at but didn't take. So like with little digital clues. And he also tagged in a differentiating way the ones that he did download. So when the forensic programmers went back through after he did this, because he knew that they would, he left a breadcrumb trail to make it easy for them to see the things that he had looked at and downloaded and looked at and not downloaded, so that they would know very quickly that there wasn't any national security exposure at risk here, beyond the fact that he was exposing that they were spying on all of us. But the programmers who came behind him to analyze what he had taken were either not smart enough to figure out what he did, or they knew and didn't care, which is more likely, because when they told the world what he had done, they included all of those things that he had looked at but not released. So it made him look like an absolute traitor. It made him look like he was revealing all of this sensitive military information, which he wasn't. And not only did he not, he left a purposeful digital trail to make it easy for them to figure it out. That's a patriot no matter how you look at it. He revealed to the American people that the government was spying on us without warrants, so illegally, and he conscientiously put in a lot of time and effort and work to make sure he didn't reveal anything sensitive, and to make it easy for the NSA to figure that out once he was gone. And of course, they threw him right under the bus and tagged him as revealing or stealing everything he touched but left. He is not a traitor no matter how you look at it, unless you look at it through the lens of the narrative they painted around him after the fact, which is, like so many times, false. I mean, isn't it ironic that he proves the NSA is illegally collecting all of our private personal communications, and they call him the traitor and the spy? So, after he sees the congressional hearing where the NSA director gives us his fictional answers to the hearing questions, Snowden goes to work for Booz Allen Hamilton, which is an American government and military contractor specializing in intelligence, technology, and cybersecurity. They provide consulting, analysis, and engineering services. They're a major provider of cybersecurity services to the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission, so not exactly lightweights. This was what Snowden was doing when he set up and arranged for the release of the documents he had gathered. So let's pause here and reflect for just a minute. We see from all of this that Edward Snowden is obviously intelligent. Without any formal degrees, he rises to very high and secure technical positions everywhere he goes. He teaches high-level military officials how to defend computer networks against foreign enemies. He works for Dell as a contractor for the CIA and the NSA. He travels the world, is awarded diplomatic status in Switzerland, and given an apartment on Lake Geneva. Then he's given a job in Hawaii. He works for Booz Allen Hamilton. He's hand-selected to provide cybersecurity for a sitting president at a NATO summit. So this is not, as the mainstream media would have us believe, just some disgruntled lone computer nerd who never went to school and stole documents from his data entry job with the NSA. He has been a cybersecurity expert for his entire career. We know he began to develop concerns over privacy violations as early as 2012, while working on NSA computer systems as a Dell contractor in Hawaii, because some of the later documents he released were from then. In fact, I think most of them. After being selected to analyze and report to the military about the ways the Chinese government was spying on its own citizens, Snowden saw parallels in the things he knew the NSA was doing, and upon digging into it, these violations were more than he could abide. This brings us to the release of the documents and programs that Snowden alerted the world about. The story of that release of information first came to the wide world through a documentary film called Citizen4 and several articles that coincided with it. And if you like these investigations and want to help keep this independent show alive, join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon and unlock exclusive agent-only content. If you believe in digging deeper and keeping truth alive, then join me at patreon.com/renegadefiles. There's a link in the show notes. And become an agent today. You can try it free for a week. And thank you if you're already an RFA agent. You make all this work. Part 2. Citizen 4. Beep, beep, beep. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the documentary film Citizen 4, it's highly recommended. It isn't a dramatic film with a plotline and twist, so spoilers for this are more information. Listening to this episode won't ruin watching the film, I don't think, but I will be going over the highlights of the information that the documentary gives us, so fair warning. Also, the 2016 feature film Snowden by Oliver Stone tells much of the same story as Citizen 4. Really good. The story of how that documentary came about is also the story of the Snowden leaks, so we're going to look into both here. For our purposes on this episode, we're using the Citizen 4 documentary as more of a source for the information Snowden revealed, rather than an analysis of the film itself. But that process goes in the order of the film, and so we will still explain some of the documentary to establish a clear context. In December of 2012, Glenn Greenwald, a lawyer and a reporter for Salon.com and a writer for The Guardian, began getting emails from someone who claimed to have important information about the American intelligence agencies and citizen privacy. After the two were unable to establish what the sender felt was a secure communication channel, the correspondences stopped. A month later, Laura Poitras, an investigative journalist and filmmaker who had made documentaries about the war in Iran and Guantanamo Bay in the post-9/11 era, started to be detained at airports anytime she traveled. She was stopped and searched and detained dozens of times. She was often detained for hours, interrogated, and agents seized her computer, cell phone, and notes, and didn't return them for weeks. She filed FOIA requests to find out why, and when those went unanswered, she filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice and other security agencies. She thought it was because of the controversial films she had made, but later discovered that she was marked as a potential security threat because DHS, or some other agency, thought that she must have had prior knowledge of a certain 2004 military action, which she had covered in one of her documentary films, but she denies this. In late 2012 and early 2013, she began receiving anonymous encrypted emails. One of them read, "The surveillance you've experienced means you've been selected, a term which will mean more to you as you learn about how the modern SIGINT system works. For now, know that every border you cross, every purchase you make, every call you dial, every cell phone tower you pass, friend you keep, article you write, site you visit, subject line you type, and packet you route is in the hands of a system whose reach is unlimited, but whose safeguards are not. Your victimization by the NSA system means that you are well aware of the threat that unrestricted secret police pose for democracies. This is a story few but you can tell. This will not be a waste of your time. I would like to confirm out of email that the keys we exchanged were not intercepted by your surveillance. Please confirm that no one has ever had a copy of your private key and it uses a strong passphrase. Assume your adversary is capable of 1 trillion guesses per second. If the device you store the private key and enter your passphrase on has been hacked, it is trivial to decrypt our communications. In the end, if you publish the source material, I will likely be implicated. This must not deter you from releasing the information I will provide. Thank you and be careful. Citizen 4. We now know that at this same time, the unwarranted data collection operation named Stellar Wind was in full operation. This was part of what was called the President's Surveillance Program, which was established by President George W. Bush after 9/11 in 2001 and was renewed over and over until at least 2007, when the last official renewal expired. Part of that included AT&T working with the NSA to turn over millions of phone records to the NSA every day throughout those 7 or 8 years. Millions per day. Billions of communications were being intercepted. This activity was folded into what became the Protect America Act of 2007, passed in August of that year, and then the FISA Amendments Act, FAA of 2008. Executive and congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle were briefed on the program's existence and scope. President Obama ran on promises to be sure that those in power were subject to the same surveillance laws as anyone else, because rumors of illegal surveillance were cropping up everywhere at the time. Publicly, the White House maintained that they had no formalized structure for collecting and storing information on American citizens, but in reality, Stellar Wind was both mature and active. The Obama administration not only failed to rein in covert and illegal surveillance of U.S. citizens started by George W. Bush, but greatly expanded these programs. This is, in part, one of the reasons Edward Snowden decided to come forth in the first place. Speaking about this time, Snowden said that the NSA was at a point where they were collecting more data than they had at any other time in their history, and, quote, "We are building the greatest weapon for oppression in the history of man, yet its directors exempt themselves from accountability." End quote. So let's dive into what we learn on the Citizen 4 documentary film that resulted in Snowden reaching out to Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald and the others who helped them. In April of 2013, Laura got the email from Snowden that initiated their meeting. At this point, she had no idea who he was. He told her that the information was extensive and that she would need help going through it all. He suggested she enlist the help of journalist Glenn Greenwald, which she did. Snowden also told her that he would include his real name in the information and leave it up to her how and when to make his name known, but that he did want her to, because that was the only way to avoid someone else from being falsely implicated in the leaks. Remember, at the time, Snowden had a place in Hawaii with a $200,000 a year salary and a girlfriend, and he was about to give all of that up. And in 2013, making $200,000 a year, even in Hawaii, was serious money. Making that now means you might be able to afford the good hot dogs at Walmart. Laura Poitras followed the directions and met the person she had been emailing for the past 4 months. He asked her to meet him in a Hong Kong hotel lobby. He said he would be in the lobby working on a Rubik's Cube, so she would know who he was. He instructed her to ask him what time the restaurant opened, and that he would say he wasn't sure, and suggest she try the lounge instead. If that conversation went exactly like that, then they would all know they were still secure, and they would only need to follow him casually after that. Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald met Snowden as arranged, and both were shocked at how young he was. They had imagined him to be some senior NSA computer security expert, which he was, but they thought he would be much older. At the time, he was 29, and a very young-looking 29. Over 8 days in a hotel room, they heard his story. Here's a clip from the first moments that the camera rolled. This starts at 23 minutes and 37 seconds and goes just past 27 minutes. And there's some edits that I took out in the middle. And this is from Citizen 4 under fair use. Speaking here, Glenn Greenwald talking to Edward Snowden.
So I just want to get a sense of why did you decide to do what you've done?
So for me, it all comes down to state power against the people's ability to meaningfully oppose that power. And I'm sitting there every day getting paid to design methods to amplify that state power. And I'm realizing that if, the policy switches that are the only thing that restrain these states were changed, you couldn't meaningfully oppose these. I mean, you would have to be the most incredibly sophisticated technical actor in existence. I mean, I'm not sure there's anybody, no matter how gifted you are, who could oppose all of the offices and all the bright people, even all the mediocre people out there with all of their tools and all their capabilities. And as I saw the promise of the Obama administration be betrayed and walked away from, and in fact actually advance the things that had been promised to be sort of curtailed and reined in and dialed back, and actually get worse, particularly drone strikes.
Right. But so if your self-interest is to live in a world in which there's maximum privacy, doing something that could put you into prison in which your privacy is completely destroyed is sort of the antithesis of that. How did you reach the point where that was a worthwhile calculation for you?
I remember what the internet was like before it was being watched, and there's never been anything in the history of man that's like it. I mean, you could, again, have children from one part of the world having an equal discussion where, they were sort of granted the same respect for their ideas in conversation with experts in a field from another part of the world on any topic, anywhere, anytime, all the time. And it was free and unrestrained. And we've seen the chilling of that and the cooling of that and the changing of that model towards something in which people self-police their own views. And they literally make jokes about ending up on the list if they donate to a political cause or if they say something in a discussion. And it's become an expectation that we're being watched. Many people I've talked to have mentioned that they're careful about what they type into search engines because they know that it's being recorded. And that limits the boundaries of their intellectual exploration. And I am more willing to risk imprisonment or any other negative outcome personally than I am willing to risk the curtailment of my intellectual freedom and that of those around me whom I care for equally as I do for myself. And again, that's not to say that I'm self-sacrificing, because it gives me, I feel good in my human experience to know that I can contribute to the good of others.
Snowden goes on in an interview at the same hotel room with Guardian journalist Ewan McCaskill to say that he has chosen to release the information to journalists because he wants impartial third parties. He doesn't want to affect the process with his own bias, that he feels this method is what's best for the public. Snowden then briefly mentions Operation Tempora, which is a UK operation with NSA connections. Since I feel like the best way to go through this episode is in order, the order that we learn things from Snowden in the documentary, rather than jumping back and forth, right now let's just take a quick peek into what we do know about Tempora. Tempora, that's Tempora, is the code word for a formerly secret computer system of the British Government Communications Headquarters, the GCHQ. This system collects internet communications to be analyzed later. It became operational in late 2011. It saves huge amounts of internet users' personal data without any individual suspicion, and without any suspicion of their wrongdoing. So it just collects from everyone. Snowden proved that data collected by the Tempora program is shared with the NSA. According to Snowden, Tempora has two parts: mastering the internet, or MTI, and global telecoms exploitation, or GTE. These two parts combine internet and telephone traffic. It's alleged that GCHQ produces larger amounts of metadata than even the NSA. The Guardian claims that no distinction is made in the gathering of data between public citizens and targeted suspects. Tempora is said to include recordings of telephone calls, email message content, Facebook entries, and the personal internet history of users. Snowden said of Tempora, "It's not just a US problem. The UK has a huge dog in this fight. They, the GCHQ, are worse than the US." So that's Tempora, by all accounts, still fully active today. Snowden tells us of the SSO, or Special Source Operations, which is a division of the NSA responsible for all programs aimed at collecting data from major fiber optic cables and switches, both inside the US and abroad. SSO started in 2006, and at the time, the NSA was collecting the equivalent of one Library of Congress every 14.4 seconds. The Washington Post described the official seal of the SSO division as something that might have been a parody, an eagle with all of the world's cables in its grasp. In short, the NSO's SSO is the umbrella division under which all other data collection operations fall. And at this point, we can dispense with explaining that Snowden tells us about this or that program because we want to avoid redundancy, and we'll just go with the understanding that all of the NSA spying programs we'll be describing moving forward come from the documents and information that he made public. You can find all of it online now. The next of those is X-Keyscore, which the NSA uses to search and analyze global internet data collected in real time. The NSA has shared X-Keyscore with other intelligence agencies in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Britain, Germany, Japan, and Denmark. We know that the Danish Defense Intelligence Service took X-Keyscore and turned right around and used it to spy on the UK, Germany, and other key allies of the US. Oops. As of 2011, a single instance of X-Keyscore could monitor 1 billion internet or telephone conversations simultaneously and collect data at a rate of about 125 gigabytes a second. At that time, the NSA was operating at least 20 X-Keyscore sites, and by 2013, they had greatly expanded that footprint. We can only guess at the capabilities today. Today, X-Keyscore consists of over 700 servers at approximately 150 sites where the NSA collects data. Let's consider that and remember the congressional testimony of NSA Director General Keith Alexander. Does the NSA collect information on US citizens' phone calls or emails? No. And this was at a time when the NSA's X-Keyscore was monitoring and collecting data on 20 billion phone and internet conversations simultaneously at all times. And what happened to General Keith Alexander for lying to Congress about spying on the American people? Well, he was promoted during the Obama administration to be the first commander of U.S. Cyber Command, a division of the DoD. He retired from that job, started a company called IronNet Cybersecurity, which received a total of $1.1 billion in funding. It went public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2021 and was delisted from the exchange in 2 years, in 2023. This left all of its retail investors with worthless shares. General Keith Alexander then joined the board of directors for Amazon. All of this, public record. So as Glenn Greenwald went through the information Snowden had given him and Laura, he started to write explosive articles in The Guardian and The Washington Post. These articles became huge news stories overnight. The first shed light on the NSA's access to millions of Verizon customer phone records on a daily basis. Parallel to the Verizon scandal is NSA Operation Fairview, a secret program where the NSA works with AT&T to collect phone, internet, and email data. Also a program called Storm Brew, where telecommunication companies themselves first screen phone calls and internet communications to identify connections to locations outside of the US, and then they pass those conversations on to the NSA. That's Storm Brew. There's also Oakstar, another NSA secret internet surveillance program, formerly secret. Oakstar is an umbrella program involving upstream surveillance of telecommunications. Upstream collection is when data is pulled directly from fiber optic cables and top-level communication infrastructure. This allows access to very high volumes of data. All of this is now provable thanks to Snowden, and the story spread across all of the major TV networks when it first broke. Millions of US citizens, none suspected of any crime, were being spied on by the NSA with impunity granted to them by a court order that was part of the Patriot Act. The next story, written by Greenwald, focused on the NSA program called PRISM, which collected user information without due cause or warrants from Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Paltalk, YouTube, AOL, Skype, and Apple, with all of their cooperation. So essentially, the entire internet at the time. At this point, so this is about halfway through the 8 days that Snowden was in that Hong Kong hotel room with the filmmaker and journalist or two who came and went. Journalist Glenn Greenwald and Edward Snowden have a conversation about how and when to make Snowden's name known as the source for the material that Greenwald was reporting on. So, you have to remember, Greenwald had written 2 articles, and it was huge. It was on every big news channel, every cable news channel. Top story of the night, Glenn Greenwald's articles. At the time, no one knew where he was getting his information. He was living in Hong Kong and also Brazil, and these were just explosive stories because they were bringing the receipts for the fact that NSA was absolutely spying on everyone. It was becoming obvious that the material had probably been leaked by one person, but no one knew who that was yet, the NSA included. So the debate they had was, the debate that Greenwald and Snowden had was that if we do put your name out there, Snowden's, we might be doing their job for them and letting them know something that would take them, we don't know how much time to figure out. If we did that, then we lose some of our advantage, which we currently have, based on the fact that they don't know what else we have, and we're reporting from an unknown source. Snowden's response to that logic is that he believes that he would be taking a much more powerful position if he did not continue to hide. Because he believes he has no reason to hide, because this isn't about him, it's about the freedom of everyone. Now, regardless of what you do or don't think about Snowden, that's the position that he has always stood on. And so Greenwald, who was writing the articles, and Snowden, who was going through and explaining the information that those articles were based on, basically what the programs were and how they worked for spying on free people, both of them realized that as soon as the NSA knew who had leaked the information, and that it was essentially just one person, that the entire story then would shift to casting him as, ironically, like I said before, the traitor and the spy. It would shift the story to him. So when you look at what Snowden did and how he did it, his only reason for remaining anonymous as long as he could was to be sure that the story was about the unlawful and unscrupulous spying activities of the NSA rather than about him. So at least as far as the breaking of the first 2 articles, he did accomplish that. But we also know that at this time the FBI raided and searched his apartment where his girlfriend still lived. We also learned in the documentary that up until then, his girlfriend had no idea where he was and what he was going to do. And the reason that he did it like that was to protect her. He didn't tell her anything because he didn't want her to know anything when they came knocking. So at a certain point, the decision was made to come forward with who Snowden was. So they filmed him in the hotel room and broadcast it to the world. This was his taking ownership of his actions and explaining what he had done and what he believed in. Explaining that free citizens in the world shouldn't be wholesale spied on by big governments for no reason, with their data collected and stored to draw upon later if they need it, if they wanted to accuse them of something in the future and implicate them in some way. So after this, Snowden applies for refugee status through the United Nations, and then he vanishes. Laura Poitras planned to stay in Hong Kong but realized she was being followed. So she went to her place in Berlin to continue working on the film. Glenn Greenwald went to Brazil and from there continued to report. The US government charged Snowden with 3 felonies on June 21st, 2013. 2 of those fell under the Espionage Act. This is important because the Espionage Act was developed to prosecute war criminals and spies after World War I. It doesn't distinguish between someone revealing information in the process of spying for a foreign nation and someone revealing information of a totally domestic nature, like Snowden was doing. At the same time, the Espionage Act makes no provision for the revelation of information that should not have been secret in the first place, arguably like all of the information that Snowden brought forth. And because of that, any defense attorney would have no ground to stand on because they would be unable to make an argument for Snowden that the information he had released should have never been secret, and that he had revealed programs that were unconstitutional, illegal, and therefore should have never been set up in the first place. None of that can be a defense simply because of the broad language framed in the Espionage Act. So because Snowden was charged with crimes that violated the Espionage Act, he therefore had no defense and would be put in the exact same category as someone who had revealed information to a foreign power for personal profit, which he did not. So in other words, the Espionage Act makes no distinction between a spy and a whistleblower. Because of this, the group of lawyers who initially looked at his case realized that there would be no such thing as a fair trial for Snowden in the US, because the Espionage Act under which Snowden had been charged decimated any possibility for a reasonable defense. Ben Weisner, who was one of Snowden's ACLU lawyers, said he believes Snowden's case would come down to 95% politics and 5% law. The US DOJ appealed to Hong Kong, asking them to extradite Snowden. 2 days later, WikiLeaks made arrangements to transport Snowden from Hong Kong and seek political asylum at an unknown location. Snowden landed in the Moscow airport and found that the US State Department had revoked his passport. This stranded him in the Russian airport, which is designated as a sort of diplomatically neutral zone. So that was his home for the moment. He stayed there for 40 days until he was finally granted political asylum in Russia for 1 year. He has recently been granted Russian citizenship and lives there now with the girlfriend he had to leave back in Hawaii. They're married and have children. And how ironic is it that you have to go to Russia to be free? But tap follow right now real quick wherever you're listening so you can stay connected to Renegade Files and help the show grow in the free world. Part 4. The current situation. So where are we now, 13 years after Snowden showed the world the power and extent of the USA's mass surveillance state? Well, some things are better and some things are worse. Due to Snowden's releases as well as a federal appeals court ruling, the government's interpretation of Section 215 of the Patriot Act was determined to be unprecedented and unwarranted. Congress passed the USA Freedom Act to amend Section 215 and stop mass surveillance of Americans' telephone records. the entirety of Section 215 of the Patriot Act was allowed to expire in 2020. But even with that, the government continued to collect hundreds of millions of phone records, but the NSA was recently forced to delete millions of those when it was further proved that they had been collected from phone service providers without legal authority or authorization. Because it could not stay within the law, the NSA shut down their post-USA Freedom CDR program, and now, because the Patriot Act Section 215 has ended, the NSA no longer has the legal authority to turn on such a program in the future. All of these are victories for privacy in the US. Also in 2015, the NSA ended its internet bulk metadata collection and stopped mining all of our data from emails that we send and from the ISPs we use, and that's also a good thing. Another thing that was ended concerns the About section of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. This is a situation where the NSA can look into your email if it is about someone they consider a threat. So if you email someone and mention, let's just say, Putin, then the NSA could look through that email. So supposedly they can't do that anymore. But then in 2024, Congress not only renewed Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the law that enabled much of the surveillance that Snowden exposed, but they actually expanded it. Under the new law's spy draft provision, the government can not only enlist telecom providers to deliver user information, but it can now order any American service provider to spy on its behalf. And that's the broad language. For instance, a cleaning service or a security guard company. There have also been ongoing and recent calls to mitigate the amounts of data big tech companies can collect from their users, and the fact is, once they have it, they could give it to the NSA, and we have no idea if they do or not. This becomes increasingly bothersome as we move into an era of mass facial recognition and AI-driven analysis. A friend and I were talking about cleaning AC vents. Riveting conversation, but I know. But anyway, for whatever reason, that was the topic for a brief minute. The next time she picked up her phone, an AC vent cleaning service ad was in her Facebook feed. We've all had that experience, but it is getting old really fast. About a month ago, I went into Home Depot. I left my phone in the truck. I had no electronic devices with me. I stood for a while looking at tile grout and grout sealers as I contemplated a project. I didn't buy any of those things, looked around at a few other items and left. That night, I saw an ad on Pinterest for the exact tile grout and grout sealers I was looking at in Home Depot. Same brand and all. Trust me when I tell you, I have never looked at tile grout or grout sealer pictures on Pinterest. And I didn't have my phone or anything else with me in Home Depot. I didn't buy anything. And there is no way that that ad was a coincidence. No way. It might not be the NSA, which this episode is about, but in a way it's worse. How did the company who makes that product, or the dealer who was advertising it online, know that I was looking at that product in the store? What level of information collection and personal identity tracking is actually happening to us in our daily lives? Snowden did accomplish some good. There are programs that have been stopped because of him, but others have expanded. And in the end, how would we ever know what they collect about us and what we say to our friends or acquaintances? How can we ever feel like we ever have any privacy? To dive deeper into the world of Renegade Files, join the RFA agency on Patreon and become an agent today. You can check out our Patreon page for free at patreon.com/renegadefiles. Or just tap the link in the show notes. You can get bonus episodes and days of other cool content that I've made for you there. Thank you if you're an RFA agent already. You make the show work. And thank you if you jump in there. I can't wait to see you. So now, we'll wrap this episode up with 3 quotes from Edward Snowden. On government surveillance, Edward Snowden said, quote, These programs were never about terrorism. They're about economic spying, social control, and diplomatic manipulation. They are about power. End quote. Snowden said, quote, "Being a patriot doesn't mean prioritizing service to government above all else. Being a patriot means knowing when to protect your country, knowing when to protect your constitution, knowing when to protect your countrymen from the violations of and encroachments of adversaries." And finally, on the importance of privacy, Edward Snowden says, quote, "Arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say." Thank you sincerely for exploring the Edward Snowden deep dive with me. Subscribe or follow Renegade Files right now, so together we can meet here next week to explore the deepest covert paranormal adventures, alien stories, hauntings, cryptids, conspiracy theories, and unsolved mysteries. I am so happy to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Right now is the best time to jump into the Renegade Files shop. There's a link in the show notes to the shop. There's a link at therenegadefiles.com. Go check out our store, all of our new merchandise, and grab some cool underground paranormal gear. Thank you. Until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, Skywatcher child.